My sister banned me from her wedding because her fiance was too nice to me. He found out, called off the wedding, and now my entire family is demanding that I fix everything. Hi everyone, my name is Michaela. I'm 24 and I'm here because I really need your opinions. I have an older sister, Leah, who was supposed to be getting married to Jonathan, 29. Everything seemed to be going great with them. They've been together for years and we all thought they were perfect for each other. But recently, things took a really strange and unexpected turn, and now their wedding is off. The reason Jonathan has refused to marry my sister is because he thinks she's being cruel by not allowing me to come to their wedding. On top of that, Leah believes Jonathan is in love with me. I know how insane that sounds, but let me give you some background. I'm not close to my sister or my parents. It's not like anything dramatic happened to cause a fallout, but once I got into college, I kind of lost touch with them. In fact, I've barely been home since I moved out for school. Most spring breaks, instead of going back home, I'd either travel or head to my grandparents' house. It just felt like a better option than dealing with the awkwardness that would come from being at home. My parents and sister are two completely different people. We've never really fit in with each other. They've got their own little world that I don't really belong to. I've always felt like they never understood me and never even tried. I remember growing up and they would all bond over things that I didn't care about. And whenever I brought up something I was interested in, it was like I was speaking a foreign language. They just never engaged. They'd listen, nod and change the topic back to whatever they were interested in. So after a while I stopped trying. Here's the thing that hurts the most. When I started pulling back from them, they didn't even try to reach out to me. It was like they were perfectly okay with me distancing myself. I was hurt by their lack of effort. You'd think family would notice when one of their own is slowly drifting away. They didn't seem to care. It just confirmed what I'd felt all along, that I didn't really belong with them. I only visited them for the major holidays, birthdays, and other celebrations, but even then, it felt more like I was just a guest in their lives. I'd show up, do the family thing and then we'd have polite conversations, but there was no warmth or connection. My sister Leah and I never had the close bond that many siblings have. She's always been the golden child in the family, the one who followed the path my parents wanted, did everything right, and fit perfectly into. I was always the odd one out. I was the black sheep of the family. It's not that they're bad people or anything, but they can be real bullies in the way they subtly put me down. You know, those little comments that seem innocent on the surface, but hit deep. Yeah, that's what I'd get. So over time I figured it was just better to avoid them. I try to spend as little time with them as possible. I don't want to put myself in a situation where I feel unwelcome and out of place. Last Christmas, Jonathan joined us for Christmas dinner. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel completely invisible. My family has a way of making me feel. I felt like I didn't belong, like I was an outsider in my own home. But Jonathan didn't treat me like that. He was genuinely nice to me. He talked to me like I was a normal person, not like the weird black sheep that I always feel like I am around my family. At first, I didn't think much of it. I mean, it was just basic decency. But for some reason, Leah was really bothered by it. It wasn't like Jonathan and I were having a deep, intimate conversation. We just talked about random stuff, travel, school, some funny things that happen at work, you know, normal stuff. But Leah immediately got weird about it. She gave me these icy looks throughout dinner. But I didn't think much of it at the time. That was until later in the evening, when she confronted me. I'll never forget it. She pulled me aside and said, "I know what you're doing. You've always been jealous of me. Now you're trying to steal my men." I was honestly in shock. I mean, what? Steal her men? I couldn't believe it. I laughed it off and told her she was being ridiculous, but she didn't drop it. She kept going on about how Jonathan was acting different when he was around me and how I was being too friendly with him. I didn't even know how to respond. It was such an insane accusation. This was coming from Leah, who has always been the center of attention. She's the perfect one, the one who my parents adore. I get it, she's their golden child. But accusing me of trying to steal her fiancé, that was a new low, even for her. I tried to brush it off, like I usually do with her. It's not like we're close anyway, so I figured she was just being paranoid or insecure for whatever reason. But here's the thing, after that night, things got weird between all of us. Leah became even more distant, which I didn't think was possible. We were never close to begin with, but now it was like she was. If I tried to talk to her, she'd give me these one-word answers or act like she couldn't be bothered. At family gatherings, she'd be glued to Jonathan's side, almost like she was marking her territory. It was ridiculous. Jonathan, on the other hand, acted like nothing had changed. He was still polite. They were still friendly and normal around me, but I was really bothered by how quickly my family seemed to side with Leah on this. No one ever said anything directly to me, but there were little signs. My mom would give me these weird looks whenever Leah and Jonathan were around. My dad, who's usually pretty neutral, started making more comments about how it's important for family to support each other or how relationships need to be respected. It was all very passive-aggressive. It felt like they were all buying into this idea that I was somehow a threat to Leah's relationship. The more I thought about it, the more it made me angry. I've never been the type to get involved in anyone's drama, let alone my sister's relationship. I barely even talk to Leah outside of family functions, so why would I suddenly be interested in her fiancé? It made no sense. A few months later, I found out that Leah was actually... Oh, she was engaged. I was pretty surprised because my sister didn't even tell me. I mean, I wasn't expecting her to send me a personalized invitation with hearts and glitter, but it was still a bit of a shock to find out from my grandparents. It was like a punch to the gut, you know. It confirmed what I'd suspected all along. I think we can all guess what it's like when your family doesn't care about you. I guess I'd been holding on to some small hope that even with all the tension and distance, she'd still consider me part of this major event in her life. I thought, hey, we're sisters, right? Even if we're not close, I'm still her family. But no. I guess I was asking too much. I didn't say anything to Leah when I found out about the engagement. At first, I thought maybe she was just busy with wedding planning or maybe it slipped her mind to tell me. I know that sounds naive, but for some reason, I was still giving her the benefit of the doubt. I figured maybe I thought she'd call me eventually, or at least get a last-minute invitation in the mail. But days turned into weeks and nothing. Then, out of the blue, Leah called me. I was honestly surprised to see her name pop up on my phone, especially considering we hadn't really spoken since that weird accusation. At Christmas, I answered the phone, trying to act casual. I hadn't been forgotten by my own sister. After a few awkward minutes of small talk, she dropped the bombshell: she wasn't inviting me to the wedding. I was silent for a second, trying to process what she just said. I mean, I wasn't super excited to go. Hearing her say it out loud still hurt. I asked her why, and that's when she gave me the most absurd reason: since Jonathan has feelings for you. She said she didn't want me there because it'd just be awkward. I had to laugh. I couldn't believe this was happening. First of all, Jonathan. He doesn't have feelings for me, and even if he did, I wasn't going to stand up in the middle of the ceremony and profess my undying love for him. The whole thing was so ridiculous that I didn't even have the energy to argue. I just said, "Have a great wedding and a happy marriage," and hung up. I didn't need that. I've had a lot of drama in my life recently. We weren't close, so it didn't really matter to me if I was part of her big day or not. I've come to terms with the fact that Leah and I were living in two completely different worlds. Yesterday was wild. I think it was Leah's rehearsal dinner, and I had no plans. I wasn't involved in any of it. I wasn't invited to the wedding and I'd already accepted that. I was just going about my usual day when my dad called me out of the blue. He said I needed to go to the venue right away. He didn't explain why or give me any details. He just told me to go. He told me to drop everything and go. I was confused and asked what was going on, but he wouldn't tell me. He just kept repeating that I needed to come immediately. At this point, I wasn't willing to give him my time or patience. This was the same family that had excluded me from the wedding and treated me badly. I felt like an outsider and like I was being made to feel like the villain in Leah's drama. I told him I wasn't coming there just because he told me to, and I hung up. 5 minutes later, my phone started buzzing again. It was Leah. I hadn't spoken to her since the wedding. In the drama, I was already dreading whatever nonsense she was about to throw at me. But what she said next I couldn't believe. Apparently, Jonathan, her fiancé, had straight up refused to marry her. The guy had called off the wedding because he couldn't stand how cruel Leah and my parents were. I mean, wow. The guy had the courage to see through all their nonsense and walk away. I was impressed, but of course, Leah wasn't calling to apologize. She had a different reason for reaching out. She wanted me to show up at the rehearsal dinner and pretend we were one big happy family, or so she thought. The kicker was that she wanted me to lie and say that I wasn't at the wedding because I didn't want to be there, not because she had banned me. Basically, she wanted me to cover for her and make it look like everything was still picture perfect, even though her entire relationship was crumbling. I was so taken aback, I could have laughed in her face. After everything she'd put me through, from accusing me of trying to steal her fiancé to not inviting me to the wedding and treating me like garbage, she now wanted me to swoop in and save the day. It was mind-boggling. I told her, "You're out of your mind. If you think I'm going to do that," I could practically hear her jaw hit the floor through the phone. She tried to argue, but I didn't stick around to hear it. I hung up, put my phone on silent and went to sleep like a baby. Jonathan calling off the wedding is like the ultimate karmic justice. I don't know the details. I don't know why he finally snapped, but I have a pretty good idea. My parents and Leah have always been controlling and manipulative. They've never been able to see past their own egos to care about how their actions affect others. I guess Jonathan finally had enough. I almost feel bad for the guy. What really gets me though is how quickly Leah and my parents turned to me for help. Once things started falling apart, it's like they realized, oh wait, maybe we do need Michaela after all. It's funny how that works. They didn't care about me when they were planning their perfect wedding. Second, the rug gets pulled out from under them. Suddenly, I'm important again. No, thanks. Today was pretty wild. I woke up to 117 missed calls and over 200 messages from my family. Yes, you read that right. Over 100 missed calls. My phone was blowing up from the moment I opened my eyes. The anxiety that washed I had to deal with all those notifications, which was not a fun way to start the day. Most of the calls were for my parents and Leah. I wasn't about to dive into that mess right away. I ignored it and decided to start my morning as normally as possible. Honestly, who wants to deal with all that drama before work? Coffee. But then I started to feel a little guilty. So I did the one thing I felt like I could handle at the moment. I called my grandparents back. They're the only ones in my family I have a genuinely good relationship with. And I knew they'd give me the lowdown. Without all the extra drama. As soon as my grandma picked up, I could hear the tension in her voice as she told me that Leah had been crying nonstop since last night. Apparently, Jonathan still wasn't budging and had completely cut her off, refusing to talk or listen. He was basically acting like Mia. Lee is devastated, and my parents are in full panic mode trying to salvage the situation. My grandma suggested that I should reach out to Jonathan to clear up any misunderstandings. I almost laughed. What misunderstandings? Jonathan made his choice and it had nothing to do with me. But I understand where my grandparents are coming from. I love them and I hate to see them stressed out because of all this. I also can't lie, I'm tired of the constant harassment of my family. If talking to Jonathan will get everyone off my back and stop the barrage of calls and messages, maybe it's worth it. What do you guys think? Update 1. Hi guys, it's been a few hours since my last post, but a lot has happened. So, here's the update. Buckle up because it's wild. When I checked who was there, it was my entire family, my parents, Leah, and Jonathan. They'd turned up unannounced, and I wasn't ready for whatever was about to happen. They said they wanted to come inside and talk, as if this was some kind of intervention. But I wasn't about to let them into I needed some space, especially after everything that had gone down. So I stepped outside, shut the door behind me, and told them that whatever they had to say, they could say it right there on my porch. Leah was the first to speak, and she immediately started making excuses. She told me to explain everything to Jonathan like I was supposed to clean up her mess and make things okay. I just stood there for a second trying to process the sheer audacity of it all. Then I realized I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to lie for her or twist the truth to make her look good. I told Jonathan the truth about what had been going on. I said that Leah had accused me of trying to steal Jonathan from her. She had banned me from the wedding because she thought he had feelings for me. She had been treating my family badly for a long time. It's been like this since we were kids. Manipulation, blame, toxicity, it's all part of the package. Jonathan stood there, listening quietly, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. But then, out of nowhere, Leah completely lost it. She slapped me, like full-on, open-handed, across the face. I was shocked, but I immediately wanted to slap her right back. I mean, come on. I've put up with her nonsense for years, and now this. But just as I raised my hand, Jonathan stepped in and grabbed Leah by the arm. He pulled her aside, away from me, and they started talking in hushed tones. I couldn't hear everything, but it was clear that things were about to get even messier. It was clear that things were about to get messier. A few minutes later, Leah came back and she was crying. She looked at all of us, me, my parents and Jonathan, and said that the engagement was officially over. Jonathan had broken things off for good. He told her they shouldn't see each other anymore. And he just walked away, leaving Leah standing there in tears. I have to admit, I felt a little sorry for her in that moment, even though we've never gotten along and she's hurt me. I don't think anyone deserves to have their engagement broken off like that. It was a brutal, raw moment. At the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that this breakup was the result of her own actions. She'd pushed Jonathan to his breaking point, just like she'd pushed me so many times before. So there we were, standing on my porch, Leah sobbing, Jonathan gone, and my parents glaring at me like I was somehow responsible for all of I could feel their judgment and disappointment. It was like they were blaming me for Lee's life falling apart. They thought I was the one who caused the breakup, not Leah and her behavior. I didn't know what to say and I definitely didn't feel like standing there any longer, so I mumbled something about needing to go inside and turned around, walking back into my house and closing the door behind me. I left them all standing outside. As soon as I closed the door, I sat down and tried to process everything that had just happened. It felt like a scene out of a soap opera, but this was my actual life. I haven't heard anything from my parents or Leah since they left. I'm sure they're furious with me. Honestly, I don't know what comes next. Update 2. Hi guys, I didn't get into it in my original post because it's quite a long story. However, I figure now is as good a time as any to unpack a little of it, as it might help me understand things better. So, here's the lowdown. I have social anxiety disorder. Growing up, I always felt like something was off with me, but I never had the words to explain it. To explain, my parents were old school. They believed mental health issues were just excuses. They'd say things like, "You're just being dramatic or you need to toughen up." If I was ever visibly anxious or having a panic attack, they'd call me weak or lazy. It felt like I was choosing to feel that way. That way, my entire childhood felt like I was constantly being punished for something I couldn't control. Things weren't any better with Leah. She wasn't just the golden child in our family, she was popular at school too. She always had this big group of friends, and they all thought they were better than everyone. I remember one time when I was about 15. Leah invited some of her friends over for a sleepover. I made the mistake of walking into the kitchen to grab a snack. As soon as I did, they all went quiet and started giggling. Leah looked at me and said something like, "Oh, look, it's our little hermit. She doesn't even." Knowing how to talk to people is important. It might sound small, but that kind of stuff was constant. I was always the punchline to their jokes. It hurt so much more because it was my own sister who led the charge. There were so many moments like that where she mocked my social awkwardness. Instead of standing up for me, my parents would just laugh or brush it off. They just laughed it off as harmless fun, but it was anything but. It was humiliating. When I got to high school, things got even worse. I remember this one particular day. I had a huge presentation for English class. For someone with social anxiety, the idea of standing in front of the whole class and speaking was my worst nightmare. I couldn't sleep. The night before, I was so anxious I was physically sick. I told my parents, who basically told me to suck it up and go. I ended up stuttering my way through the presentation while the class laughed. By the time I got home, I was in tears. My parents said it's just a presentation. Michaela, stop making a big deal out of it. That was their go-to line. I was always making things into a bigger deal than they were, according to them. By the time I went to college, I was mentally exhausted. I knew I needed help, but my family had made me believe that seeking help was weak. It wasn't until I started seeing the counselor on campus that I realized what I was dealing with. The counselor listened to me and really listened. For the first time, I felt like someone understood what I was going through. She recommended that I see a psychiatrist to get a proper diagnosis. Getting that diagnosis was such a relief. I was relieved to know that what I was feeling had a name: social anxiety disorder. It was a real game changer. It meant that I wasn't just being dramatic or looking for attention, like my family had always said. After seeing the psychiatrist, I started therapy, and slowly but surely things began to improve. I learned some great coping mechanisms, like how to handle panic attacks, how to communicate my needs without feeling ashamed, and most importantly, how I had to set boundaries with people who didn't respect me. That's when I really started pulling away from my family. I realized that being around them was triggering my anxiety and that I needed space to heal. So I stopped coming home for every little thing. I stopped answering every phone call and text. I started choosing myself. And for the first time, I felt like I had some control over my life, but of course my family didn't see it that way. To them, I was abandoning them, being selfish and ungrateful. They never once asked me why I pulled away or if I was okay. Instead, they just accused me of being distant and dramatic, just like they always had. Leah, of course, continued to be Leah whenever I did come. When I went home for the holidays or birthdays, she'd make snide comments about how I thought I was too good for the family now, or how I was so dramatic for not visiting more often. Things with my family are still strained, though. I keep them at arm's length because every time I try to let them in, they hurt me again. My parents still don't acknowledge my anxiety, as Leah's still the same. She hasn't changed in all these years. If anything, her behavior during the Jonathan debacle just proves she hasn't grown or learned anything. She's still stuck in the same toxic patterns. I'm not about to let myself get sucked back into that. So that's why I've kept my distance from my family as a challenge, and part of me wishes things were different. However, I've learned to prioritize my own well-being, and that's been the best decision I've ever made. Update 3. Hello everyone. She's been angry with me for a while now, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster. Not only has she shared my number with lots of people, which has resulted in a lot of messages from people I don't want to hear from, but she's also been egging my house a few times. It's been a bit of a nuisance. It's really frustrating having to clean eggs off my front door and driveway. We're adults here, right? At first, I tried to ignore it, but after the second time it happened, I was just fed up. I tried reaching out to my parents for some backup, thinking maybe they would intervene and talk some sense into her. But when I called them, she just said, "It's between you two girls." Like, this is not just sibling rivalry anymore. It's vandalism. I expected them to step in, but I guess they'd rather stay out of it and keep pretending everything is fine. After realizing I was on my own, I decided it was time to take a stand. I called Leah directly and told her that if she ever did it again, I told her that I would file a police complaint against her because it counts as vandalism and she could actually get in trouble for it. This seemed to upset her a lot, and she started to call me names and say that I was being dramatic about everything. I don't know if she even hears herself. It's like she thinks she can just throw a tantrum and I'm supposed to take it. I hung up feeling a mix of relief and frustration. It was exhausting to deal with her, but at least I got my point across. Surprisingly, she hasn't bothered me since. I don't know if she's scared of the police or just too busy plotting her next move, but I'll take the peace.